Can I start? So as you all know, global warming is responsible for killing the polar bears, the penguins, melting the snow caps, the ice caps, anything else that is weather related, but specifically the most important point is that global warming is man-made and caused by the carbon emissions released from human activities, such as the burning from fossil fuels. The main source of carbon emissions, according to the U.S. Green Building Council, comes from the building sector, of which 70% of the energy consumed in the U.S. is a result of building operations. Therefore, as a result of these statistics, individuals and architects have begun to take the initiative to reduce their carbon footprint by using renewable energy systems. However, the controversy is that there's a lot of people who are against these because they either do not believe in global warming, as many people in the government have proven, or they are afraid of the cost and the space it would take. However, tonight I'm arguing that renewable energy on site, as in the place where the energy is being consumed, would be more advantageous. Because one, it would decrease the amount of carbon emissions released in the transportation of energy. 2, it costs less. And 3, on-site renewable energy is accessible and requires little maintenance. So before I continue, I would like to define some terms I mentioned. Specifically, renewable energy is defined as energy produced by nature and generated by a natural source, such as sunlight, wind, or water. And second, another term that is important is carbon footprint, which is defined by Cal Poly professor and architect Pablo LaRoche as the total amount of greenhouse gases produced to directly and indirectly support human activities, usually expressed in equivalent tons of carbon dioxide, which basically means that the carbon footprint of each individual is based on the amount of carbon they produce in the daily activities. So my first point is that on-site generated power would decrease the amount of carbon emissions released in the transportation of energy. For example, when you turn on the light in your room, Edison has to transport the energy they produce at the plant to your house through the wires, and that consumes both energy and carbon. According to the California Energy Commission in 2016, they found that the transportation and treatment of water, treatment and disposal of wastewater, and the energy used to heat and consume water account for nearly 20% of the total electricity and 30% of non-power plant-related natural gas consumed in California, which essentially means that in the transportation of energy to your house to provide those comforts, that carbon is released to the atmosphere. However, on-site renewable energy would reduce the amount of carbon emitted to the atmosphere. According to the United Kingdom Department for Energy and Climate Change, in a study they conducted from 2013 to 2016, on-site generated and self-supplied electricity emitted 40.45 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour, whereas natural gas emitted 0.184 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour in 2015 and 2016. However, off-site energy emitted more carbon dioxide. Such electricity produced 0.54 kilograms of carbon dioxide, whereas natural gas emitted 0.184 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour, which essentially means that off-site energy emits more carbon dioxide than on-site renewable energy would. My second point is that on-site renewable energy costs less. Most people complain that it costs too much to implement renewable energy at their house or wherever they're building. However, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, renewable energy on-site would require minimal upfront capital costs, ability to monetize tax incentives, typically a known long-term energy price, no operations and maintenance responsibilities, which means that the only cost is installation cost. According to research and content manager Sarah Matisai of the solar panel system Energy Sage, this installation cost would cost about $11,000 after tax credits for a 5 kilowatt system with the average price of $3.16 per kilowatt hour, which does sound like a lot, but in consideration it's about a year tuition here at Cal Poly if you commute from home. And in the long run, renewable energy would save a lot of money. According to Luke Richardson, a digital analyst of the company Energy Sage in 2017, in California, the average price of a 5 kilowatt system that costs about $13,370, with the average price of 18 cents per kilowatt hour would save over $28,360 in the course of 20 years, which is more than double the price you pay to implement the renewable on-site energy. Which leads me to my third point. Renewable energy lowers the cost of Third point, renewable energy is accessible and requires little maintenance. Renewable energy itself means that the energy is infinite. Therefore, it's accessible to all because nature does not need one to produce itself. According to CEO Sarah Pendorf of the 3 Degrees Corporation, clean energy company, on-site opportunities are broadly available across the U.S. in 44 U.S. states, D.C., and Puerto Rico, which allows net meter and helps create economic opportunities across the country. Moreover, renewable energy requires no operation or maintenance facilities. This is supported by the U.S. Office of Energy, which states that no operations and maintenance responsibilities are required for on-site renewable energy sources, and it also provides minimal risk to the agency. In conclusion, on-site renewable energy would emit less carbon dioxide as it reduces the need for transportation to the site. It costs less, and it is accessible to all and requires little maintenance. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd leave all that stuff that's used in the very beginning out of the issue, talking about global warming and killing all the polar bears and the penguins and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a distraction from your point. The question simply becomes about carbon dioxide and the carbon footprint. And I think you can make it pretty specific and just suggest, like you did, that renewable energy is going to reduce that if we do it on site, and that's fine. I just think it's a little confusing when you get into that argument because it invites a response to those particular points, and that's not really what the substantive part of your argument is about. Your argument is about the practicality of these on-site resources. You did have a clear statement of the proposition. The secondary issues are laid out pretty clearly. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, you kind of suggest that people are resistant to it for some reason. You mentioned that some people dismiss the carbon issue entirely. That might be part of the reason. And then you suggest that there are cost issues that are involved in it. That might be part of the reason too. But those are both presuppositions, and I think you need a little bit more information on those points. The secondary points are labeled clearly in the body of the speech. That's good. And for the most part, you describe things partially. I assume that 90% of what you're talking about on on-site renewable energy seems to be like solar panels on people's houses. There may be other things that you are talking about, but it's never clear what those other things would be. I heard reference to that kind of thing, and when you talk about consumer costs, that's pretty much what it is that you are talking about when you've got those figures that you mentioned, $11,000, $13,000, $20,000 over 20 years, that kind of stuff. I assume that that's what it's all tied into. So it might even be a little bit more focused than the way you've got it structured now. I thought you had a lot of good information in the presentation. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming because of the numbers that you're dealing with. When you start doing the comparisons on the kilowatt hours, the cost per kilowatt hour, the amount that it does, it's sometimes is problematic when you're presenting a bunch of numbers and you want to do them in contrast and you don't have a visual ability to do that. You got to pace yourself a little bit more, and you've got to kind of do an internal summary on what those cost comparisons mean, and I think you needed to do a little bit more of that. It doesn't mean that the information is bad, but it needs to be explained a little bit more, and I think you need to help the audience understand it a little bit more. I think ultimately we get the idea of the cost comparison that you're suggesting, but how significant it is, I mean, I'm talking about 0.5, 0.184, and I'm going, well, those don't sound particularly significant, but I'm sure that they are significant, and you're presenting them as being significant, but I don't have any way to kind of grasp the significance of those sorts of things. I just got those numbers, and that is, I think, a little bit problematic. The sources that you give, for the most part, seem pretty reasonable in the presentation, so I think you're good there. The generalizations, again, when we're talking about solar power stuff, I think there's plenty of research that could talk about how effective it has been in the places where it's being used, and you could demonstrate that, especially with the amount of energy that's produced. I think we need a little bit more information on that, not just the cost issues. Maybe some of the reservations that people have would be whether or not that's practical in all places. I think that's a question that a lot of folks have, especially people who don't live here in sunny Southern California, and they're wondering, well, is it really worth the investment for me? Am I going to get that kind of return? I mean, if England can get it, I guess that's fine, but I'm not exactly sure that we're talking about the same thing that England's using for their replacements. I thought that might have been biofuel. I'm not quite sure. The presentation, you need to kind of look up a little bit more. Probably one or two more practices would smooth out some of the rougher edges. There wasn't anything that was particularly harmful, just I think that you could probably convince us and be a little bit more credible if you like I said, with the numbers, you could explain them a little bit more and talk to us a little bit more. All right, thank you.